Welcome to this week's edition of Two Men in the Middle, where two men in the middle of the heartland talk about politics, news, and current events. I'm Brandon Kinnig.
I'm Craig Huey.
So, Craig, the big issue this week, Roe v. Wade. The leak of the draft court decision was a bombshell earlier this past week. That's all everybody's been talking about all week, and the ramifications of this. And I feel like this is one of those issues ever since the Amy Coney Barrett nomination was a fear. But then I think many people comforted themselves with the fact that it's precedent. It's been around for 50 years. It's still not going to happen. We know that Amy Coney Barrett and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh during confirmation hearings, gave statements that seemed to indicate it was settled law as well.
It was super precedent.
That's right. Super precedent was the language used. And now we're on the precipice of seeing this completely overturned, and that's significant for a number of reasons. But first and foremost, like what is the response here? I mean, what can Democrats do? How can they react? They're going to schedule a vote in the Senate to codify abortion rights into law.
They won't get.
They won't, but they don't have.
They'll filibuster that. That'll never come for a vote.
They'll filibuster. They don't have the votes for that. So do we just, what do we do?
I didn't think this would be the outcome. I thought they would chip away at this again like they've done in the past, but I didn't think a full reversal of Roe was on the table. So maybe let's start off with a few things that we both agree on. I think we both agree that Roe legally, as a legal decision, is filled with holes. These are well documented. We're not legal scholars, but it's easy to kind of understand the argument that the Supreme Court simply made up law kind of out of whole cloth during all of this. And this was a very shaky legal decision from day one. That was always the case. Secondly, too, I think we can both agree on that this leak is very, very bad. This is not like other leaks. This is the Supreme Court. This is...
It's an incredible break with precedent.
It is.
I mean, you have to go back to the 1800s. I think the 1870s, the last time you saw...
There's been partial leaks, but never something like this.
Yeah.
And I think the Democrats really need to come up with a better strategy in this phase of where we're at for acknowledging the leak, how bad it was, and taking steps to shore that up. I'm assuming that this came from one of the liberal justices' staff. This has to be somebody on Kagan or Sotomayor's staff would make the most sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that's most likely. There is a point of view that says it could have been somebody on the conservative side to
possibly
just buffer the justices like Gorsuch and Kavanaugh to keep them in the mode of their decision and make sure that they don't flip. Since it's really a draft decision, they could still change their minds. But I think it's more likely it came from the liberal side to, I think, get the word out there, have an impact on the midterms. That's how I would see it, use it as a rallying cry. And a couple of things about this decision. We know that it was written by Alito and matched his personality, very fiery, incendiary language. It's a direct rebuke at not only Roe, but Casey as well, which was another significant abortion opinion from the court, and it's also notable that this appears to be a 5-4 decision. So what that tells you too is that Chief Justice Roberts was uncomfortable with the extent of this decision and found himself wanting to find a middle ground that would undo and roll back abortion law without undoing Roe completely, to keep that as a core.
And that's what Roberts really wants to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's made, I think if you look at the totality of what he has said, that's kind of in the vein of who he is, and he's trying to establish himself as this moderating force on the court that keeps it from going from one to either extreme.
Yeah. But getting back to Alito's decision, and Brandon, this is a question of conservativeship. I read that decision, or most of it, and I was amazed how many times Alito mentions natural law, things that we've done in the past, this connection back to things that occurred in common law and just what are traditional practices of our society, and how much he depends on that in this decision. It really struck me as, if you want to know one of the basic differences when judges get to the Supreme Court between conservative and liberal/progressive judges, conservative judges are grounded on what's traditionally been accepted as common practice or common law.
Yeah.
And that really holds a lot of sway for them in deciding decisions moving forward, where your liberal and progressive judges really take almost all of that and just throw it out of it's not in their thought process. It's where do we, progressive and liberals, how do we get to where we're going in this direction faster, easier, cleaner? And they don't come from that perspective. So it was really kind of surprising about how much of the language that Alito used seemed to be natural law and in some ways very kind of outdated and very kind of aggressive.
Well, and the reliance on a natural law argument is something that is underpinned more from a philosophical standpoint.
Yeah.
You find that in philosophy and in terms of understanding root of civilizations. It's not something so much it's argued in a theological context, right? You hear it a lot in theology, a lot in philosophy, not so much in legal context. So I do think that stands out. So I think it also reinforces the argument that people have against Alito and against his decision as having religious roots or being grounded in that type of moral religious underpinning rather than, being separated from that and based solely on the law itself and the impact on rights. So, yeah, I agree. And it's the decision is interesting, and this opens up a complete Pandora's box. And as you said, the 50 years is usually, passes for precedent. I mean, it's rare. You would have to go pretty far back to think about the last Supreme Court decision that was overturned after this length of time.
I don't know what examples would exist. I mean, there's like Brown versus Board of Education, things like that.
Right.
Some of the things around slavery,
Dred Scott decision,
that have been reversed. Something else that struck me between liberal and conservative judges, and you see this with Judge Roberts. Your liberal progressive judges are more likely to consider what's happening in the country and the culture right now and how that impacts their decision. More conservative judges, they just simply do not put that into their mix at all. That is just not something, and I think it's a point of contention between the two sides. And I think it's a core disagreement where your Alito, your Thomas is, we're just head down reading the law, reading the words. What did the words say? That's what we're doing. Where Roberts, where he breaks from them, like you said, he is way more interested in how people perceive the court, what is the reputation of the court, and what is the mood of the country and reflective to some of their decisions.
Yeah, he's much more attuned to that, which is interesting. And so he has kind of established himself as this kind of bedrock moderating force between various factions. And and for a while, he was able to lead that way because he was the penultimate vote in determining outcomes, and that's no longer the case anymore. So he's going to find himself on the minority side of many of these 5-4 votes just because of Trump's ability to appoint 3 justices now, and that's where we find ourselves.
And there seems to be some sort of discussion about what this verdict actually does. If you're a Republican or a conservative and you're trying to put this out in the most positive framing, you say this is democracy in action.
It sends it back to the states.
Correct.
So we're going to have this patchwork. Now, we have 13 states that have trigger laws on the book, which means that they have already passed,
like Missouri, Kansas,
laws in their state legislatures that would overturn abortion as soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned. So that you have about 26 states overall that will likely have some type of abortion ban in place when the dust settles, which leaves you with 24 states that will have codified abortion to some extent, protect abortion. So, you're going to have the country divided almost completely in half, states that have legalized abortion, states that did not. And so that's where you're going to find yourself. So it's going to be based on what part of the country you live in.
So I think this is another difference between how conservatives and liberals look at abortion, where conservatives look at this as a policy issue that needs to be decided by the majority. Liberals look at this as an inalienable right that the government cannot take away, much like your right to free speech.
Right.
And that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution enshrines this right there, and it's the American way and the American system. We don't allow the government to take rights away from you that were granted by you simply being here. So you've got two different views of what's happening now. The Republicans are very kind of vested in this narrative of this is democracy in action. Now we're going to get to see how democracy really works because people in the individual states will get to decide if abortion is legal or not.
Well, the Republicans that are talking about it, right? There's many Republicans that don't want to talk about this right now.
Republicans are very centered on the leak. That's all they want to talk about right now for political purposes.
Well, and let's back up because we have to put this in a context. Republicans for 50 plus years have been able to use Roe v. Wade as a rallying cry. They've been able to run on a, quote, pro-life platform and say, I'm pro-life, I oppose abortion, with knowing that, Roe v. Wade was the law of the land and it wasn't going to impact their chances. There have been many Republicans that have run in purple areas or even blue areas that have run as, quote unquote, pro-life and have been able to garner votes from pro-choice individuals who do not consider that their overriding issue because most people thought, well, this is settled law anyway, and so I can look at secondary issues and other issues and bring those to the forefront. That is no longer the case. This completely usurps the entire paradigm that we've been used to for 50 years. So granted, Republicans don't want to talk about it because it puts them in a very difficult position. Yeah. And it's a recognition that, the countries, if you look at where Americans stand on the abortion issue, and we always get back to this, it's very complex. Yeah. Americans are in the middle. They have a very complicated view when it comes to abortion. They support keeping it legal by a margin of 60 to 70%, depending on the polls you look at, with some restrictions. There is no widespread support for far-reaching bans on abortion with no exceptions. There's no far-reaching support for legalizing abortion up to birth with no exceptions.
Yes.
So Americans are in the middle on a spectrum on this issue. So this now puts Republicans on the defensive because most Americans do not support overturning Roe v. Wade. And they can no longer now, this becomes a rallying cry for the left. Republicans have been able to run on an anti-abortion mantra. Yeah. But if Roe v. Wade is overturned and you have half the states that ban it, it's no longer a rallying cry. I mean, it's no longer going to be the penultimate issue for the people that vote anti-abortion, but it will be for the people that vote to pro-choice. So again, it flips the narrative. There's also been the case for the longest side that the anti-abortion voters who consider that their ultimate issue have always been much more energized to vote solely on that issue than the pro-choice side. And I think there's something to that, right? I mean, I know anecdotally, and then there's plenty of people out there who vote Republican solely based on the abortion issue.
This is a single issue.
And they would, and they wouldn't necessarily vote Republican without that being an issue. And there's a lot of people that say that's the reason that Trump ultimately was able to win when he did, because there's a lot of people who were not comfortable with him but voted on that issue alone.
And one of the things this does, so I had a very passionate discussion with my wife yesterday and the other day and all week about this topic. And one of the things that I think she started to realize is your opinion on abortion in some ways at a national level now is irrelevant.
Right. Because
what you have to deal with now is your state.
That's correct.
And in Missouri, the question's already been decided. There's a snapback law. So if this is one of the causes you want to be involved with, you're no longer involved at the federal level where you're surrounded by people who think the way you do. You're surrounded by pro-choice folks who feel abortion is a right, and it's very comfortable. Now, if you want to keep that activism up, now you've got to drop down to your state level, where you're going to be meeting all kinds of people in Missouri who don't think the way you do, have a completely opposite stance about abortion as a policy, and are making a good faith argument. Right? I mean, you can make a good faith argument that abortion should be outlawed. One of the things why I think people are so upset by this on the Dem side is now their activism changes. You change from donating to the guy who ran against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina in 2020, raised $100 million, lost by 30 points. But you felt like you were doing something because you donated to that. That all goes away. Now the fight becomes much more, it's not as clean and it's not as easy, I guess, when you have to battle state by state. And that's where this is.
And I think you're going to see
if this goes down, the whole national abortion movement goes away. Because now it's 50 battlegrounds you got to fight through.
Well, you're going to see a shift of that money, that fundraising on the abortion fight, go to the state level. And so you're going to see a surge, I think, in spending for the state legislative races to change outcomes. And you're right. It's interesting. Like the paradigm on this issue has shifted. So even if you go back to Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, the mantra on the Republican side has always been, we oppose abortion except in cases of rape, incest, life, and health of the mother. Like you're starting to see that disappear. And so Republicans are now looking at passing laws in places like Alabama and Louisiana that don't have exceptions for life and health of the mother or rape or incest.
Or ectopical pregnancy.
Right. And you have Missouri, which is considering legislation that would criminalize women who go across state lines to get an abortion, which, by the way, is likely completely unconstitutional. Like that, I can't see how that would hold up because you cannot criminalize somebody for entering another state to have a procedure that's legal there outside of your state.
And then you have states like Colorado that have advertised that they're going to set up abortion clinics on the border with Kansas and turn abortion into a tourism trap. That's very distasteful. I think this is
But you can see where this is headed. I mean, absolutely. So you see these borderline states where you have red states on one side, blue line. I absolutely can see that happening. That's going to be the...
Isn't this... If you got the founding fathers together, they would say, oh, this is working just like we designed it, right? In a federalist system, issues that cannot be reached consensus on at the federal level are decided state by state. And then as a citizen in the United States, you get to decide where you live. Well, isn't that exactly how this is supposed to work?
This was the pre-Roe America, right? So prior to Roe in 1973, it was a state-by-state issue. Now, it was still most states had banned it by that time. There's only a handful of states like New York and Connecticut and a few others where it was legal. But that was the world before Roe.
But what I'm saying is, isn't this exactly how we are set up to do this? There's an issue at the federal level we are never going to reach consensus on. Therefore, it is decided by the states. That's a federalist system. That's all what we've said is the best way to go and what we want.
Now, that's how it is when it's come to like government-run health insurance prior to Obamacare. Like if you look at the states have always been laboratories of democracy, and different states would have different policies and different angles. I think, and that was the same with like gay marriage. Now, there are some issues, that are looked at. This gets back to our argument about what's inherently a right, that have been looked at as universal rights where we've decided, hey, we need federal, either federal legislation or federal ruling to codify this into something that's nationally a right that everybody, all Americans can enjoy. We were state by state when it came to slavery, and a civil war broke out over that. So there's been some issues that have been so filled with so much tension where, we have codified them.
I think I'm coming around to the argument that if we're going to hang together as the United States in the long term, Texas has to Texas and California has to California. And that's okay.
And I agree to a degree, but I think there is a legitimate fear that this is starting a slippery slope because this is what one of those, the inherent right to privacy that the court established, again, it was a very thin legal context. And I think, and liberals would do well to remember, even very pro-choice people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg argued that Roe, abortion should be legalized, but the Roe decision was awful. Like it was on very thin legal ground, and a lot of people on the left acknowledge that. But the problem is, like, does this roll back gay marriage? Obergefell versus blanking on the case. California. Yeah, Obergefell versus California, and then Griswold versus Connecticut, which is what legalized birth control. And you have people like Alito who have basically alluded to that in their writings. And so do we revert back those rights, and does this cause... And then some of these abortion bans at the state level that are being passed are so general and so vague that they would also include bans on IUDs. And
it's certainly possible.
And also bans on IVF.
It's the same legal argument that overturned Roe that could overturn those.
Right.
What I don't understand, too, this is why I hate Republicans nominating Supreme Court justice. A Republican-nominated conservative, traditionalist, textualist, whatever one you want to call it, Supreme Court justice has the opinion. If it doesn't specifically say it in the Constitution, it's going to be a fight to get it recognized as a right. Mm-hmm. I just think as a concept, we are so far past that. That might have worked in, 1797, but
it doesn't work.
It does not work right now. And the nomination process for Supreme Court, that has to change, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. And I mean, look at, maybe term limits. I mean, should we appoint justices, at their late 30s, early 40s that can reside on the court until they die? I mean,
does this lead to any I think both of us agree extending the court to 17 people, whatever, that's a dumb idea.
Yeah.
That's stupid.
I mean, that's court packing. That was tried by FDR.
Yeah.
I mean, that didn't go over well.
But there's got to be some set of reforms in the nomination process that we can look at that would make sense. I mean, we've basically allowed you to come in, interview for a lifelong position where you basically get to impact every citizen in the United States. And you don't have to answer anything.
Well, and again, I look back, we need filibuster reform, but the filibuster was lifted when it came to Supreme Court nominees. Yep. And you think back, I mean, if that hadn't occurred, I mean, maybe we would have some of the nominees we have today or that are sitting on the court.
I think, too, did Mitch McConnell overplay his hand a little bit with Merrick Garland was the start of it, and then it ended with Amy Coney Barrett. And once they did what they did there, it was obvious they were doing that because they knew Roe was in reach. They were doing that because they knew we have a legitimate chance to overturn
Well, and there's
Roe.
been an intentional effort via the Federalist Society to nominate candidates who would overturn Roe v. Wade.
This has been a slow-moving plan for 50 years.
Yes, but much more so in the last couple of decades.
Yes,
because if you go back to the late 90s, early 2000s court, that was a Republican-dominated Supreme Court. That was the Rehnquist court when William Rehnquist was Chief Justice. Mm-hmm. They had a 5-4 Republican-nominated majority, and they turned back several efforts to repeal Roe v. Wade. That was the court majority that passed or affirmed Casey, the Casey versus Planned Parenthood case.
By the way, another big winner in this is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He already has the wind at his back for the 2024 election. Now, he's the dude that did it. If I'm Donald Trump at my next rally, I'm talking about how many Republican politicians stood before you and said, I got it done, folks.
But, I mean, did you see the latest? I mean, Donald Trump was directly asked about it. He doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, but there will be a point where he does. And it won't be any type of the conversation we're having today. It will be for 50 years, Republicans got up in front of you and said they were I did this. So for all of the evangelicals, Christians, religious folks that may have a problem with me, just remember, okay, I got all these other issues over here that you don't like. Who got the white whale?
Yeah.
It was me. I mean, this just cleared the field for Trump too. Do you think DeSantis is going to run? No, there's no way.
You really don't think he's going to run?
No, he's too smart. He's too smart. Trump has the wind at his back. Why muddy yourself and take a chance at through this primary? You do give it 4 years. I just don't think DeSantis is going to run.
I think a lot depends on what happens between now and the end of the year in terms of charges brought against Trump, in terms of money issues, in terms of lawsuits, which will determine whether or not he runs in 2024. Again, I could see him running, but at the same time, he's also known to be someone who's fairly lazy, and I don't know, at the end of the day, if he wants to run again, because he's able to grift off of this as well. So the benefits of having the presidency again, and it gives him legal protection, but also he's able to fundraise and grift without restriction while he's not president. And so there's that.
Let's get back to Roe. We'll use this as a pivot to politically.
Yeah.
What does this mean to the midterms? I think maybe marginally it may be worth a handful of congressional seats, and there'll be some Republican senator that steps on his tongue and does something stupid. But I don't think I don't think this pivots the axis much.
Does it become the central messaging in every race, Senate and House for Democrats across the country? Are they able to stay on message?
It could, But that would mean the Democrats develop a centralized, effective political message that they're able to bake throughout all of their candidates and deliver consistently. Brandon, have you ever seen a Democratic Party capable of doing that?
I have not. By the way, I haven't
well
seen,
beyond our reach.
I'm eager to watch like recent polling that comes out on this, on the midterms, on people's thoughts about the case. It's still too soon because we're not even a week out yet to to see if it changes the pendulum. The other issue is typically, despite whatever else is happening, we'll see if Roe can change this. The economy is always at the forefront. And at a time where we have record inflation, highest in 40 years, and angst about rising fuel prices, the question is, can Roe supersede inflation as the top issue in voters' minds, or at least in women's minds? That remains to be seen.
What's a tank of gas costing you these days, Brandon?
When I last filled up, and I have a Honda Civic that gets good gas mileage, I think it was $45-something. Yeah.
I have a Toyota Camry, and it was $57. My point being is there are very many practical, real-world issues that have people fired up.
Yeah.
To break that bubble, to have this penetrate
Very difficult.
all of those things that have already baked into the midterms is going to be extremely difficult.
Yeah.
So unless the Republicans make a massive miscalculation somewhere, which I don't think they can, because there's not enough. There's not 60 votes in Congress for a federal ban on abortion. The Republicans aren't going to push that because they know they don't have the votes to do it. So we're all
there's
kind
not
of
even
now,
55 votes for that.
I don't think so. If the Republicans won't even talk about the topic, they're not going to kind of try to really go balls out and do a federal ban on abortion.
Yeah.
That just won't happen. If they win the Senate, even if they had 60 votes at the end of 2022, I don't think they would. I don't think they'd do it.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see, can Democrats find a message, codify that message to the whole party, and deliver it effectively? And I think that message has to be about Republicans' threat to restrict rights. This has to be tied into Jan 6. You've got to paint this whole broad picture of the Republican Party.
Yeah, the greater issue about rights, how that filters on down, like you said, everything from gay marriage to birth control to all of these issues that are at risk now. And so they have to make that argument. I think they have an opening. It creates an opportunity for them, but it's a very small window. And again, the question is whether they can remain on message.
I'm trying to think of who's a kind of middle of the road Democratic senator running for re-election.
Who's up this time around? That's
We'll just role play. I'm generic Democratic Senate candidate A, and I'm a current senator. I'm running for re-election, and we are at a debate. And I start off with, I need you all to listen to me for the next 3 to 5 minutes, because I need to paint you a picture of what the Republican Party has become. And we need to start back with Trump, and I need to walk you through everything through J6 up to this decision so you understand where I'm coming from. And then my Republican counterpart gets up and says, gas prices suck, don't they? Crowd roars. There's no, I don't think there's a way that you can craft this message. There's no way you can nuance this.
No.
We're going to have to find a way that we can dilute this down to a yellable slogan like MAGA or America First or whatever. We've got to find a way to get this digestible to our voting base. And I just don't think the Democrats have. Who is the skilled politician that can do that? God damn it, Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, they would have totally turned this around. Biden has none of that skill, none of that support,
Kamala
none
Harris
of that energy.
doesn't have that ability.
She's a total non-starter.
So we always go back to that, right? It's a lack of an effective messenger and communicator. And again, we don't have that on the Democratic side. I mean, heck, we don't even know who the Democratic candidate in 2024 is going to be.
I'll bet everything I own that it's not Biden. It can't be.
Oh
Biden.
yeah, it can't be Biden.
There's just no way.
And it's up in the air whether or not that's Kamala Harris. I mean,
it can't be.
And which means then who it is. Like, we have no idea.
I'm reading articles in the Hill these days, and the question is, should the Democrats just concede 2024? Should we just say, hey, we'll just run by? We're going to lose. We know we're going to lose. We're not going to put a ton of effort into this.
That's crazy 2 years out. You can't concede an election.
I mean, you know who has the most impact on the presidential election is the sitting president.
Yeah.
Because they win re-election like almost all the time. So Biden will have the most impact over who wins by his decision.
Right.
Does he run or does he not run?
Well, and again, 2 years is a long time, especially with the economy. So the heir apparent, could have at that point point to Biden's record in terms of having to reduce inflation.
Biden can't campaign. The only reason Biden's president was he got to in 2020 he got to COVID campaign. He doesn't have the energy, physically or mentally.
No,
and I'm not
can't.
calling him, I'm not saying he has dementia, but as an 82-year-old, 81-year-old man, he doesn't have the energy to put on a presidential campaign.
No way. I mean, you're gonna have to bring Barack Obama back out to campaign on the
Well, they'll just Adderall Trump up or whatever he does, and he'll just be a lunatic for the next year and a half. So, yeah, I don't think Biden's running. But anyway, yeah, back to how Roe affects the midterms. I think on the edges at best. And I think the big opportunity to have it really swing is limited by the Democrats. Just don't have a politician with the skill to lay it out.
I think there are some states like Pennsylvania where it could have a positive impact for Democrats in terms of getting their voters out, where those are kind of on the margin neck and neck now, both the Senate race and the governor's race. Is it the Senate race or the governor's race? I'm blanking out. Where the incumbent Attorney General Josh Shapiro is running on the Democrat side.
God damn it! I've heard that name on a podcast, but I didn't.
Which he's actually a really good candidate. He's a well-spoken, more moderate Democrat who I think has the ability to keep that even in a bad year for Democrats. So that's a possibility. But there's a handful of states where it can possibly make the difference depending on turnout.
I think we both agree that on the edges this will have an impact, and there's going to be somebody lose either a Senate or a Congress seat because they handle this completely wrong.
Yeah.
But in the end, this doesn't turn a 25 gain into a loss for the Republicans. There's just too much stuff to run on. And midterms are usually
a referendum on the president
and a referendum on how you feeling about things.
Yes.
I don't know anybody that would answer that question that, I feel good. Things are good in the country right now.
And again, do you remember the last president who actually gained seats for his party in a midterm? I mean, you have to go.
I know FDR did.
Far back. George W. Bush, 2002, right after 9/11, Republicans actually gained seats. But that was an anomaly based on the environment.
Part of this loss is just historic pattern.
Right.
It just happens. And you talk about the burden or the weight of governing. Boy, the Dems picked a really shitty time to own all three branches of government.
They did,
because the burden of governing is difficult, would have been difficult for anybody.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
I'm not saying they're doing a good job, but they stepped into
they were
a really
left a
rough
mess
spot.
by Trump. I mean, you have the pandemic and picking up the pieces from that. You have the economy the way it was. And it's difficult, right? Because I think, even on the good news, unemployment is down to 3.6%, which is phenomenal. There's actually a labor shortage, but companies have more jobs than they can fill. So on some aspects like that, we're doing really well. But then on prices, on inflation, we're in a bad place. We have interest rates which are being hiked, and there's a danger there of starting a recession if we get that, go way too far with that. So it's a very dicey situation. You can't be a message that as well as you would like to. And
the Biden administration is just ignoring these things. I mean, they really have no active plan to fight inflation.
Yeah.
They don't talk about it that much. I mean, this is the Roe decision is something that people have to sit down. Like I said, this is going to take time to digest. It's going to take some time to figure out what does a post-Roe world look like, because we've never been here before.
Yeah.
But it's really easy to get pissed when it's $72 to fill up your Honda Pilot.
Because that's something you see and feel every day. And that's something that everybody sees and feels on a personal level.
When you're starting to make decisions about, do I really need to drive over there because gas is so expensive? Nothing else, I don't believe, is really going to permeate that bubble to get people off of, it's just not going good right now. This is just another example of it's not going good right now. And again, if you want to punish Republicans, I get that. But don't forget the Dems here. Remember that time? I mean, multiple times we've had 60 Senate majorities. We never passed anything to codify this.
So that's a good question. I wanted to address that, not only in the Senate and the House, but also on the state level.
Yeah.
A lot of these places like Wisconsin that have these trigger laws that go into effect, at one point, Democrats did control those levers of government.
Take it off the books.
How come they didn't pass laws to codify it at that time? They didn't. So again, a lot of missed opportunity. in terms of being able to, and maybe some of it was just naivete and disbelief that Roe v. Wade could ever be overturned. But again, you would have had to just be completely ignoring the systematic effort on the right, over the course of 50 years to do this.
But there's no more. I think Chuck Schumer standing up in the Senate, giving his passionate speech about how horrible the Republicans are and promising this week they're going to schedule a vote that codifies
which isn't
Roe
going to
into
go
law
anywhere,
is the epitome of American politics in 2022.
Performative.
A old man who nobody likes giving a performative speech about nothing, promising an action that he can't deliver
on
for the only purpose of making you excitable.
Correct.
There it is. That's really all you need to know.
The last word I want to say on this, too, is there is a danger for Democrats to overreach on this. I think their messaging has to be very clear. A good example is Beto O'Rourke, who's running for governor of Texas, has said that he wants to codify access to abortion up to the point of birth with no restrictions. And we need to remember that the American majority that doesn't support overturning Roe v. Wade doesn't mean that they are, satisfied with having, abortion on demand with no restrictions.
Yeah.
There's a spectrum there. The vast majority of Americans favor keeping it legalized, but with certain restrictions up to the point, especially near viability. And so if Democrats get too far away where they focus on making this an unlimited right, they're going to lose portions of the electorate that are completely with them on the Roe v. Wade decision. And so, again, there needs to be...
And as Democrats, we've already lost the thread. We've lost the thread over the last 20 years, where abortion went from safe, legal, and rare. That is language almost
that all
of
Americans
us
could agree
can find some way to agree on. To now, it's abortion on demand up to the point of birth.
Well, and even the tone and the way that abortion is talked about has changed, right? Where it's like, it used to be like, this is a decision some women are in. It's not a great decision. It's not optimal. Women should have the ability to make this choice for themselves, but we can't, we don't want to pretend that, that this is something to celebrate. Whereas now there's this idea, let's celebrate it, and let's encourage it. And again, I think that fails to see that for most Americans and for most women too, like there's nuance here. Like there's ambiguous and ambivalence on, even for those who have personally had an abortion, many of them, say I had to have it because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like it's not something that I'm excited or want to preach from the rooftops. I was put in a very difficult position, and this is the decision I made.
This is a great point because that has something to do with it. I don't know what, and by that I mean the fact that the left has made abortion this cultural positive thing, it almost seems like. I don't know what or how much that had with driving the right, but it had to in some ways.
Yeah.
That cultural pivot from safe, legal, and rare to on demand up to the point of birth, that is off-putting to, I would say, the vast majority of Americans. And what I've never understood about abortion is that I'm pro-choice. I believe you're pro-choice too.
I'm more in the middle on abortion. So
I'll use us as an example.
Right.
Any argument that you would make about abortion that's contrary to mine is in good faith.
Right.
Because you're arguing for life. And at the end of the day, this is where the dibs are going to step on our nuts. At the end of the day, you're arguing about the killing of a child. And let's not even have the argument about what viability is. I don't give a shit if it's a clump of cells or a fully formed fetus. If you let it go, it will become a human being.
Right.
It is a potential life with potential at any point in time after conception. So we're boxed in our argument, or we used to be boxed in our argument by the morality of what an abortion was. When we've thrown that away, I don't think that helped us at all.
No.
You have Lena Dunham, I'm pretty sure it was her, who wrote some op-ed about she's a full woman or she couldn't be a full woman because she hadn't had an abortion yet. That's ridiculous. And the fact that we're promoting that to young women is also ridiculous. And while, yes, I completely agree with I'm completely pro-choice. I'm not up to birth, but I think, the first 2 trimesters, unregulated, third trimester, severely regulated.
Right.
I think most people
where I think most Americans are there at some level, yeah.
And how did we miss the fact that it's distasteful to argue more than that? And I think that's something the Dems have to take a look at on themselves.
Right.
We've lost the cultural in some way, we haven't lost the it's a right, but we've lost a little bit of abortion's a celebration. We've lost focus on what it really is. And we can't incorporate that into our argument
and understanding
anymore.
that there's a wide segment of people who support keeping it legalized, but are still uneasy with it, find it unsettling, that don't
as
see
you
it as
should.
Right. That and there's a real argument to be made that you could go after Republicans and say if you were truly pro-life, you should support birth control and comprehensive sex education, and then support for women who decide to raise their children post-birth with childcare and resources, and they could make that broader argument rather than focusing solely on celebrating the cause of abortion and having and lifting any and every restrictive. Because again, there are people like me who are out there who think it should be completely restricted in later stages, who support things like sonograms and waiting periods, but not completely overturning it.
See, we could debate that.
Yeah.
I'm not totally into that, especially the sonogram thing, but I understand your point. I get that, hey, this is a living human inside of you. There is some logic you could make about those arguments.
And at the very least, there's probably common agreement that I think both sides could find on making sure that when women make that choice, they're given as much information as possible, that, it's not something by either side they're pressured into, right? So that there's, again, it's alleviating the pressure that they would get from making that decision either way. So I think that's the opportunity there, and I think that there's a lot of gray, there's a lot of nuance, and a lot of women I know personally fall somewhat in that spectrum. They're very, I think, fearful of what's happening with Roe v. Wade overturned. Many of them have personal experiences. We were talking about I'm going to mess up on saying the word atopical pregnancies, and other issues that have either impacted themselves health-wise or the potential baby. But I think it fails to see there's a whole spectrum of reasons too when women get abortions, and there's many who get it out of necessity, who don't necessarily, want to terminate the pregnancy. But there are life-threatening reasons. There are health-threatening reasons to the potential baby too. And so, when you have something like Roe v. Wade overturned and states passing their own laws that don't look at that nuance, it creates a lot of issues.
Kirsten Gillibrand is a horrible politician. My evidence of this is that she ran for president and her entire platform was, I'm a mother, which in no way qualifies you to be the president of the United States.
Right.
She gave a press conference or participated in a press conference this week, and she dusted off the old dusty trope of men have no place in this. Really? We don't? We have no place in raising children? Legally, we have all kinds of responsibilities when it comes to children. If you're using that men just need to shut up and let women decide this, that's a dumb argument too. It's a very dumb argument.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you have to be careful on the messaging, and I think both sides do as well.
And to my Democratic friends, when you're arguing out there, be sensitive to the fact that what you're arguing about is ending the life of a human being.
Right.
And this is where I think for us to reach a consensus of how to move forward would be both sides operating with some humility, some empathy, and some grace. And we might as well just pick up bats and beat the shit out of each other.
I do wonder in terms of effectiveness or success of, these state bans and the overturning of Roe, how much that's going to be diluted or reduced by technology, right? A significant number of abortions now are pill-based.
Tennessee already banned those. Did you see that?
I saw that, but the problem is, how do they control and enforce that ban?
I have no clue.
Because I don't know that there's effective ways to do that, because you can circumvent by ordering online and going through many different ways to be able to.
I was wondering this, and I think this is right. If you're a young woman sitting in Kansas, can you order abortion pills online and get them?
You can, yeah.
And
in fact,
you can.
A lot of that was done during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a real shift towards pill-based abortion.
That's the other thing this has never made sense, that we focus on the clinical procedure of abortion. Where is the medical side of this? Which I think there are more medical abortions than there are procedural abortions.
That is
in the United States.
That has shifted. That wasn't the case, I think, even 10 years ago. But
yeah.
And so I think that presents a challenge too in terms of enforcing these types of bans. There's a outfit in Europe that supports an organization that supports women with abortifacient drugs who live in countries where it's banned, and they've been talking about shipping pills to women in red states. So there apparently appear to be plenty of ways to get around some of these bans as well. So the question is, and states are going to try to be more creative in trying to enforce it, but most states don't have the ability. They don't have to enforce this. And where do you start? I mean, it's just like criminalizing women who go out of state to have abortions. Like, how are you going to do that logistically?
And why? For what reason? What policy good? What cultural good are you accomplishing by doing something like that?
Well, there's none. There's none. I mean, let alone that it's unconstitutional too. I mean, it's just it would be analogy would be criminalizing someone, a Kansas resident who goes to Colorado and smokes weed there, and then when they return, you prosecute them for doing something illegal, even though it was done in Colorado where it was legal.
Dick move by Kansas,
right? I mean,
I can see Kansas doing that too.
But constitutionally, that would not hold up. There's no way that could hold up with the. I mean, we're a nation of states, but we're also the United States.
Yeah,
and I mean, you can't. One state can't criminalize something that's done in another state that's perfectly legal outside of their state. There's no legal ground for that.
The most interesting thing about this over the next 5 years is going to watch, do we make the pivot to more awareness of what federalism is in states' rights, and we learn to live with this? Or do we... The alternative to that is we want more centralized federal control? What's going to be really hard to talk to people about this issue, and I'm not taking a swipe at anybody, is that people just don't know enough about how the federal government and state governments work to really understand what's happening with this getting pushed to the states.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't know who their state senator or state representative is, and they confuse state government with federal government all the time.
Even with my wife, trying to talk with her about, okay, you're mad at this. It's a 50-state thing, and you want to overturn it where? Okay, I want to overturn it in my home state, right? That's where you would go.
In Missouri.
Most. It completely reframes the argument. Because back then, my wife could give $100 to Planned Parenthood and feel good that she was supporting women's abortion rights throughout the United States. That's gone.
Yeah.
That's a significant change. Where does that energy go? Where does that money go? Does it become more and it grows to fight this, or does it dissipate? Does it go away?
It's really a state-by-state strategy is what it becomes. And you have to have chapters and you have to have organizational capability at the state level in every single state that's, with their head to the ground, knowing what the policy implications are, what the legislation is. I mean, it becomes much more complex.
Because if I'm a Republican running for any type of national office, I just say, well, you don't like the federalist system? What are you saying to me? When you say, I don't like the idea now that 50 states get to decide this issue, are you saying that you're against a federalist system? Are you saying that you want more power at the federal government? What power?
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to get people. Now you have to ask people the question, do you support the basic framework that defines the United States political system? Because if you do, then you support this decision. There is nothing about this decision other than it goes against precedent, which there's even precedent for ending precedent. Dred Scott is a perfect example. I think it was Brown versus Board of Education, that then Plessy versus Ferguson. So there's a precedent for overturning these things. My point to the Democrats are, again, anywhere you put your foot down to argue, you're going to be on shaky ground. And we've got to be very precise and very articulate and very clear about how we message this.
Well, they have to argue it from a standpoint of settled law, precedent, unraveling other items that have come to be recognized as human rights, and that it creates a slippery slope and an avalanche, essentially.
Republicans are about creating political instability across the political spectrum, and they're doing this to muddy the water in an attempt, I think, to put Trump back in office. I don't see how you can look at the political landscape and not come to that conclusion. The entire Republican Party has closed ranks around Trump to protect him. I mean, he still has kingmaker power in the Republican Party. Speaking of that, how comfortable would you be with J.D. Vance voting for the next? Well, let's just lay them all out there. How comfortable are you going to be with J.D. Vance, Dr. Oz, and Herschel Walker vote for the Supreme Court? And Herschel Walker's first question is, what's the Supreme Court?
That's a scary proposition. But I would say I'm most afraid of J.D. Vance because he is educated, he's smart, and he has the ability to, I think, codify autocracy and authoritarianism to a degree that Trump hasn't been able to do because Trump can never stay on message and is incoherent. At the end of the day, Trump is all about himself. Where J.D. Vance has done this 180-degree pivot, out of just this need for power. And I think he has a much potential to be destructive and much more damaging. If you look at what he's tweeted out, his statements, the talk about having Trump return to office and replace the entire federal bureaucracy and fire every person who works for the government. Like, that is what keeps me up at night and what I find very scary. If I were to prioritize any of those Senate races in terms of wanting to see a Republican defeat in the general, it would be J.D. Vance in Ohio.
I mean, of the three big Senate seats that Trump's endorsed, Herschel Walker's an idiot. He'll win on name recognition, but he's the same as Tommy Tuberville.
Yeah.
He doesn't give a shit. Just tell me what you want me to do. I'll come in when I have to vote, and just is what it is. Dr. Oz is just a salesman grifter. He's done this for years. He's used TV and audience to grift on.
Do you think he'll win the general?
I have no idea. Is that Connor Lamb and that other guy, Feather, whatever?
Yeah, they're battling it out.
So, and he's the lieutenant governor right now, right? Yeah. So
he's more Bernie progressive.
He
side
is.
Of the party. Connor Lamb's the centrist moderate.
He is leading Connor Lamb. Yeah. I've also heard he's a complete empty vessel. Just has he can deliver the tagline, but just there's nothing beneath that.
Yeah.
So I think he has a chance, Dr. Oz, just on name. Let me ask you this question. How many people over the age of 60 bought a product that they saw on Oprah that Dr. Oz endorsed? 200,000?
Yeah.
300,000? I mean, he's just there to steal and grift.
Yeah.
Because that's what he is.
Oh, that's what he's done. I mean, he's been a peddler of...
It's J.D. Vance that's the real problem.
Yeah.
And how do you create... Maybe they taught you this in
and J.D. Vance
school.
Is only young. He's only 38 or something?
How do you create a platform, Brandon, to run for Senate that's all about hating the United States Senate? That's what I don't understand.
Yeah.
I mean, all he talks about is the destruction of the federal government. And he wants Trump back in, as you said, to destroy the executive branch and what a disruptive force he's going to be in the Senate. How can you run for something that you so obviously despise? That's a Republican thing. I've never understood that.
Yeah, I haven't either.
Elect me for Senate because I hate being a senator. I don't know. I think I am reading a lot into J.D. Vance's victory and Trump's power in the Republican Party. Am I overthinking that, or do you think that's still I'm in the right spot?
No, you're in the right spot, because if you look at J.D. Vance, I mean, he was polling fourth and fifth. I mean, he came from behind. You know, you have to realize he hasn't even had residency in Ohio in a long time. He reestablished residency.
He won by like 6 or 8 points, didn't he?
Yeah, and kind of just swooped in as this Peter Thiel-backed candidate, and then got Trump's endorsement, and the polling changed, and he came to the forefront against Josh Mandel, who has a long political history.
He's a kook.
State. Yeah, exactly. But again, you can't, I think, summarize it any other way than Trump still has power. I mean, that endorsement makes a difference. And Trump isn't going to win all of the races he endorses in. And Trump is also like all about winning. And that's why like he pulled his endorsement from
Bo Brooks.
in Alabama when he saw that his polling was going down. Because for Trump, it's all about the wins and notching those wins.
He'll shit on Purdue at some point because he's not going to beat Kemp in a primary.
No, that's not going to happen.
But isn't J.D. Vance everything we hate about the primary system?
Yeah.
You have to be ultra radical because you've got to run to the hardest wing of your party's base, which he has definitely done.
Right.
I guess the question now is, has he put so much tape out there that it can be used against him in a general election? And I don't really know a lot about Tim Ryan. I know Tim Ryan is for.
So he's probably
won for some bigger slots.
He's the strongest
Ohio
Democrat,
lost, right?
He has, but he's a congressman. He's from the House, so he serves a Youngstown-based Ohio district right now, which is very blue-collar, industrial steel mill. He's the best candidate the Democrats could have in that race, which makes it a race. So I think he does have a chance to win that because he does have the blue collar background. He talks middle class issues. Yeah. He talks about minimum wage, and he's been able to win re-election time and time again, even in with a district and constituency that has supported Trump. So if there's anybody that has a chance, it's Tim Ryan. For once, I think the Democrats read the tea leaves and they've been able to nominate a candidate who's has an opportunity, which is rare, I think.
Yeah, J.D. Vance, it's going to be interesting to see. Is he going to moderate himself now for...
But how does he? He's gone so far to the crazy. I mean, you lose credibility at some point.
Do you?
I mean...
This is part of the Trump effect.
This is a guy back in 2016 who implied he was considering voting for Hillary because he could absolutely not vote for Trump.
Sure.
And he goes from that and to being disparaging to Trump to being his biggest cheerleader and just,
And he still won. Comfortably.
Yeah.
None of that mattered.
Right. All that mattered was Trump's endorsement.
Trump. What the Trump effect tells you is that you can be as lunatic as you want to win, and then you can just completely reinvent yourself at the next stage.
Let's not forget that
no one will hold you accountable.
Mandel and his Vance's other opponents ran plenty of ads against him where they used his past words or tried to use his past words against him. It didn't matter.
Sure.
I mean, none of it mattered. And I mean, even did you hear Trump's misstep on the campaign trail when he combined
J.P. Mandel or something? Yeah.
I mean, because Trump doesn't. He doesn't care.
No.
I mean, it's just about pegging wins and keeping his name out there and having that influence. But at the end of the day, he still has that sway.
And that is the most lasting, or that's the most damaging effect of Trump, and something I think is going to be long lasting.
Yeah.
Get as nutty as you want in the primary. Talk about bringing Trump back in and firing the entire federal. There's no penalty to be paid.
No.
What Trump said, what Trump showed is you can just say anything you want, just deny, lie, and just keep going. And I guess now we've just said that's politics 101.
Again, I think the needle has moved and the norms have changed to such a degree that we don't even stop and think about that anymore. Like it's so crazy that we're just used to that.
And if Trump gets back into 2024, now he's going to have a group of people that he's helped get elected in the Senate and Congress that's going to be surrogates for him on the campaign trail.
Not only that, if we have a close election at all, or we're facing a repeat of what we saw in 2020, there won't be any hesitation. He'll have the numbers there to overturn the election, send the Electoral College results to the House and have the House vote on. I mean, it's a completely new paradigm. For those that care about electoral norms and the democratic process, and the fact that we were able to just barely avoid a constitutional crisis in 2020, there won't be any avoiding of that in 2024.
No, there is only one entity that can control/end Donald Trump, and that's the Republican Party.
Yeah,
and they won't
do it.
They won't do it. That question's been asked and answered 100 times. They're just simply not going to do it.
And it's so infuriating. I think there's that new book that's coming out, This Too Will Pass, about those reporters. And again, another book on the Trump era. But Mitch McConnell was quoted in the book as referring to Trump as an SOB and saying, Democrats are going to save us from that SOB. He was counting on the impeachment vote, and yet still, a complete coward wouldn't vote for impeachment himself or encourage his members to do so.
With one vote, he could have ended it, and he didn't.
And according to the book, which I find this super infuriating and frustrating, and found myself just cussing up a storm, apparently Mitch McConnell assumed many of his members would vote for impeachment, and then many of them did not. And so he did put himself out there telling them what to do, and then he was caught off guard by the fact that so few actually voted for impeachment. And it's like, are you kidding me? I mean,
Mitch McConnell is the classic. Show me which way my people are marching so I can go lead them.
Right.
And I think there's another excerpt in that book where he just couldn't understand Liz Cheney taking a moral stance because he's like, she's going to lose power. What benefit is that? He saw no benefit to what Liz Cheney did because she gave up her position and she gave up her institutional control.
Right.
And to McConnell, there's nothing more important than that.
That's true.
Yeah. For Dems getting angry, let's not forget old Uncle Mitch in his role in this. We can't do anything to him because he's protected by the geographical boundaries of Kentucky.
What he did with Merrick Garland set into motion.
That's right.
This would have never happened if it wasn't for the Merrick Garland incident.
This is what... There's no sense to focus on McConnell anymore because it's state by state. There is no central target anymore for abortion people to point to as a rallying cry.
No.
There's no one policy. There's no one law. There's no one person. And I think what Democrats are going to slowly start to learn, this is good. In its best case, this defuses the argument. My wife's passion and energy for donating to Planned Parenthood and anti-abortion causes, I believe, is going to diminish when now it's the realization all you can impact is Missouri.
Yeah,
that's it. And it will in the recent future or the upcoming future, there's not going to be a chance to vote it out in Missouri.
Right.
So you're stuck. Do you still donate your $100 a month to Planned Parenthood?
I mean, the closest you could get is get a group that would get a statewide referendum on the ballot, which Missouri does have a referendum process to.
Yeah,
on that.
You're never going to get that through. I don't think. I don't know. It would be interesting to see.
Well, that it has a chance of possibility, unlike through the legislature, because it's never going to happen.
Yeah, but where that breaks down is who's going to write that? What is that language going to be? You've looked at laws before at the state level that are 3 paragraphs long for you to read.
Oh yeah.
Do you think Missouri could craft that? Would be a tough lift and a hard ask for someone to do.
Also, I think last thing I want to say is Democrats need to take a very hard look at themselves. Back when the Merrick Garland incident happened, I don't remember the details, but looking back, why did Democrats try to block out their legislation? Why did they utilize procedural maneuvers to bring everything to a halt? It feels like, they just shrugged. They let Republicans do that, and then there was no response to that. Even from, I thought President Obama himself was very weak, in terms of rolling over. Why do Democrats roll over like that?
Jody and I both said, if Chocolate Jesus puts the word out to come to the Capitol and surround the Supreme Court, we'll be there. Millions of people would have been there. Yeah. You're right. We completely rolled over. This is good for the Democrat friends. We've got some blame in this too.
And looking back, there was a little bit of pressure, not much, but there was a little bit of talk of, when Obama was president, especially in 2014, 2015, about having Ruth Bader Ginsburg retiring.
This is another one.
And she wanted to stay on the court. And again, it's that would have also been changed things completely. And instead, we're at where we are now.
Actions have consequences in this.
Right.
When we had the 60-vote majority under Obama, why didn't we pass this legislation?
Yeah.
We've had all kinds of opportunities to codify this. We never took it. So we've got to share some blame to why we're here. And again, why didn't we do that? Because nobody wanted the political tag put on him about that's the senator who sponsored the abortion bill.
Right.
That person voted for an abortion. It was completely political why we didn't do it. And because we didn't, now we're standing in this spot.
So it always goes back to retaining power. And so that's why none of these things get
100%.
done.
It's all a game about who's got the lever of power.
And nobody wants to give power up.
Nobody wants to give it up. Brandon, is spring officially here? It's supposed to be 90 degrees next week.
So I would say that spring has passed us. We're going from winter to summer. This past week, we had temperatures in the low 50s, 50, 51 degrees, and we're going to 90s and 100-degree heat index.
So we're going right into summer.
Right into summer. I mean, within a few days. So welcome to Kansas City.
So it's going to be humid as
spring
shit.
And fall, really long winter and summer. That's what it's like, yeah.
I have to give a shout out to my daughter is graduating college next weekend.
Oh, nice.
The 13th. She graduated on time with honors.
That's amazing.
She won the Drury University Communications Department Student of the Year or whatever. She got nominated to do a TED Talk at her college, which she did, which I got the chance to see, which was excellent. And the best news, Brandon, is she already has a job.
Congratulations to her.
So,
yeah.
Joe and I, we just couldn't be we're just on cloud nine.
Something
Just
in the
couldn't be more
communications
happy.
field? Is that what she's doing?
She's going to work for a company called In Touch in Kansas City.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think they do pharmaceutical marketing.
Yeah, they're a big, well-known national agency based here in Kansas City.
So she's
exciting.
just as happy as she could be. So,
well, yeah, congratulations to your daughter. That's I didn't realize that she was already graduating senior, because I know you've spoken about her at different times, and yours are just fun.
Brandon, have you looked for an entry-level apartment in a while in the greater Kansas City area?
I have not.
And I'm not complaining, because I know Kansas City's real estate market's probably better and more accessible than most in the country, but it's not as easy as I remember it.
I mean, in terms of rent price,
anything that's new is completely filled, and they have a waiting list. Buying a small house, that's totally off the table.
Oh, yeah. By the way, I know a couple right now, dual income, just one child, that said a couple years ago with their salaries, they could have easily afforded a pretty significantly sized home anywhere in the suburbs. They cannot find a place. They're getting outbid by investors.
Yeah.
One of the homes that they bid on went $40,000 over. They offered $40,000 over asking, but an investor offered $125,000 over asking in cash for everything. And they're like, we can't pay in cash for but that's what's happening now.
If you want to know something that the federal government should step in on, that right there.
Yeah. I don't see how this can be sustained. I feel like this has to bottom out at some point.
And 700 square foot apartments are $1,100 to $1,500.
Yeah, the apartment prices are insane.
Hell?
Yeah.
It used to be in Kansas City, if you were dual income or you had an income level of, let's say, $300,000, you pretty much could pick wherever you wanted to live in the city.
Right.
There were some neighborhoods that were out of range, but you had free run. Now, that's just not the case.
Yeah.
When I was in Florida for the month, I was sitting there one day and the news was on in the background, and my parents live in Lee County, Florida. And the news story was there was only 3 homes in Lee County, Florida that were $300,000 or less for sale.
Wow.
That's it. And the whole premise was, hey, Florida runs on $15 an hour workers. We can't keep attracting that type of labor force.
No, you can't do that.
If we haven't win. I also saw an article today that junior colleges in California, especially on some of the coastal cities, are struggling to the point that they might close when the average home in a county is $4 million. There's nobody with kids lives there. No families live there. It's mostly older retired folks that live there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I am over the moon that Katie is graduating and everything she's done. Extremely proud of her.
That's awesome. Yeah.
My fear now is just for kids of her generation, the home ownership dream that we had. I don't know if that's going to be a reality for them. It's just going to be very, very different.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. And sad. All right. That's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.